Hi, welcome back to Tiny Garage Fabrication. Today's episode we're working on the Talon. We're going to install the clutch, put the transmission back, clean up some wiring, and then I'll let you in on a little secret. We're going to start the car today. Stay tuned, let's turn 2. So I scored a parts car from a local DSM guy for 200 bucks. He was going to crush it, so I took it off his hands. Now I took the subframe, the spindles, the calipers. I took a lot of stuff from the interior. I took the seat rails, a large chunk of floor pan, the dash cowl, glove box door, the door sills. From the rear I took the sway bar, the brakes, and from the back I took some of the little bumper support brackets. And there were some other parts and pieces throughout the car that I took, and I'm really glad that I got this, but now it's time for this thing to go get crushed. Here's the subframe pieces from the parts car. I got the bare metal spots and the rusty spots sanded down, scuffed up with some self-etch primer. Getting ready to spray some black on here. Not doing anything real serious, just rattle can job, just to kind of keep it better than it was. I'm sure it would have lasted forever the way it was, but it'll at least look a little better and last just as long now. While the subframes were removed, it was a great time to get under here and clean out almost 30 years worth of junk, dirt, grime, grease. Pretty easy, just some degreaser, a scrub brush, some water, and it looks so much nicer down here. It's the main subframe that I took out of the parts car. Now check this out, look at that skill. You learn a lot of tricks doing things by yourself all the time. Popping the control arms back in. Now you notice how the subframe is loose right here. You kind of need to keep it loose on these cars in order to get this bracket in place and get everything tensioned up properly. And of course you don't torque everything down to final torque until the car is resting on its weight. That way you don't over stress the rubber bushings. Steering rack is a pretty simple swap in this car. It's 4 bolts really is all that holds it in, and then you just gotta snake it in and out. Now it is much more difficult with the sway bar still on the car, but the sway bar is another 2 bolts and it comes in and out. Speaking of the sway bar, look at this beautiful piece. I got it all refreshed and powder coated. Now time for the clutch. Need to clean up the flywheel and the pressure plate with some brake cleaner. Using a clutch alignment tool, and then go across everything in a crisscross pattern. Snug it all up, make sure the tool slides in and out freely, and then torque everything to spec. Perfect. Right here, this is a good look at how bad the subframe pieces were before I swapped them. It's just gross looking. Apply some grease to the pivot pin, the clutch fork ears, and the input shaft collar. And the throwout bearing gets clipped in place. Next up I wrestled the transmission in with just a floor jack. It is a very, very tight fit, getting this transmission maneuvered in place correctly so that it lines up and slides in. But with a little bit of patience you can do it without any help. Now the wiring on this car was absolutely terrible. Most of the connectors had been overheated and stressed and they all cracked. And I had already removed the loom to do some troubleshooting on the wiring because that was a problem of why the engine wouldn't start. So I'll remove the loom, drape it over the passenger side fender, so that I can replace all the fuel injector connectors and most of the stuff for the coolant temp sensor and the AC switch sensor. The fuel injectors turned out to be bad, so let's take all the old ones out by removing the fuel rail, popping them out, removing all the old O-rings, some refreshed 450cc injectors, add new O-rings to these, lubricate them with some petroleum jelly, and slide it into the fuel rail. Now the fuel injector connectors are what I needed to replace mostly, so I cut those off and I got some updated kind. And here I'm adding some split loom, and we'll splice these in correctly. I'll show you my way on how I do that. Now this is called a Western Union splice. Put the wires together at 90 degrees to each other, and then you turn one over the other one, and then you go back and turn the other side against it. And when you're done, they'll hold. You can pull on them and they won't come apart, and also the wire is not any thicker than it was originally, basically. Adding the split loom for looks and a little bit of abrasion resistance, and using a piece of heat shrink to keep the end from fraying out. I got to do this to a bunch more plugs, and then we'll get this put back into the car. But before that, I'm going to wrap it all up in some nice underhood heat resistant cloth tape by Tessa. This just gives it kind of that finished look. Now that the transmission is back in, we can get the rest of the drivetrain up front put together. So the axles have been put back, as has the transfer case. Get the struts in place. And then add the spindles that I rebuilt. I rebuilt these with all new wheel bearings and seals, and I put on the brake backing plates that I powder coated in the last episode, as well as brand new brake rotors, and we'll get to the calipers. I broke these down and powder coated these. There's an entire video as to what I did to powder coat them. There's a link up in the corner. Now I forgot to get any video of me actually installing the calipers, but here they are on the car, and here are the wheels that I chose, and you'll see exactly why I went with the color that I chose. This thing looks great. Gonna make sure I get my timing light put on the number 1 spark plug wire. And now that it's all wired with new injectors, this thing should fire right up. Much better. Now to set the timing, you have to turn the crank angle sensor until the timing marks align to where they need to be, as seen with the timing light. purrs like a kitten. Sounds real good. Now let's go ahead and tighten up the crank angle sensor to lock in the timing. Do a couple small visual checks, make sure nothing's on fire, make sure there's no bad leaks or anything. And we'll get this thing all finished up for the day. Well, I'm super relieved to have the car running, finally. I gotta be honest, it's been over a year. The thing had me stumped for 8 or 9 months. There was no injector pulse. I worked through that for a long time. Apparently something I did got that back, and then it turned out that the fuel injectors themselves were bad. So new injectors, she fired right up. That's awesome. You got a little sneak peek of the wheels that I'm running on this thing. I think they look slick. It looks better with all of them on and on the ground. Stay tuned for some more video, we can get to that. Getting that parts car was super clutch. I got so many good parts off that car that it really allowed me to move forward with the build. A few more of those parts will come in the next episode. And we'll be wrapping up this video soon so we can get back on track with the Datsun 620 build. As always, leave a like, leave a comment, please subscribe, share the video if you think it's good content. And until next time, thanks everybody.